This is the story of the world's fastest commercial airplane. The Concorde, how it smashed records and broke barriers, and why it can never fly again. First of all, what was the Concorde? Well, it was a British-French supersonic passenger airliner that first took to the skies in 1969 and started scheduled airline services in 1976. The word Concorde actually came from the meeting of the two French and English words for agreement, and that's exactly what the plane represented, a shared achievement between the British Aircraft Corporation and the French company Sud Aviation. But thanks to Concorde, this was cut in half. Another amazing fact about the Concorde is that it flew so high that passengers could see the curvature of the Earth and the darkness of space above. Most commercial jets fly between 35,000 and 40,000 feet, but the Concorde cruised at 60,000 feet.
Wow.
This is higher than most military aircraft. And up there, the sky is filled with stars, and you can see the curvature of the Earth. The Concorde was many things, but one of them was an engineering marvel. In fact, some of its technology was way ahead of its time. But believe it or not, the Concorde was designed using nothing but a slide rule and basic mathematics. One of the reasons why the Concorde never really took off commercially was because it burned through fuel like you wouldn't believe. In fact, it burned 6,770 gallons, or 25,629 liters every single hour. That's enough to fill a standard car in just under 3 minutes. To put into perspective, a 747 burns through 4,800 gallons, or 18,000 liters of fuel per hour. The 747 can carry more than 400 passengers over 7,000 miles. Of course, the expansion and contraction of the Concorde's fuselage could be measured on the ground. But that wasn't good enough for some engineers. At the height of the Cold War, the Concorde was seen as a symbol of cooperation between two nations that were otherwise sworn enemies. Of course, it wasn't the only example of joint ventures between nations. For example, the Airbus A380 is a joint project between Airbus companies from Germany, France, Spain, and the UK. Now, before you start thinking that it was some kind of miracle, let me clarify. Not only did it break the sound barrier, but it also emitted more nitrogen oxides than subsonic aircraft. This meant that it was spewing out harmful gases that were damaging the ozone layer. So not only was it noisy and a hazard on the ground, but it was also bad for the environment. If you want to learn more about the Concorde, we recommend checking out our other videos, talking about anecdotal evidence here. Some passengers reported that they suffered less jet lag when flying on the Concorde. This was because they spent less time in the air. And apparently this reduced exposure to time zone changes can make a difference. But the Concorde was certainly one of the most famous examples of international collaboration. In fact, it was a direct rival to the Soviet Union's Tu-144, which was nicknamed the Concordski. Unlike the Concorde, which flew for almost 30 years, the Concordski suffered several catastrophic crashes and had a very short service life. It was retired within just 5 years. They wanted to see what was going on in real time, so they fitted a metal ruler inside the cockpit. It had suffered from a number of setbacks in the years leading up to this, including high operating costs, aging technology, and post-9/11 security issues. And as of 2025, no supersonic passenger aircraft has taken its place. Yes, there are a number of supersonic jets currently in development, but none of them have come close to matching the Concorde's top speed. It's unlikely that any of them will be able to match the Concorde anytime soon. But the final nail in the coffin was the Air France crash. Despite the improvements that could have been made to prevent such a disaster from happening again, the public outcry forced the hand of officials who had no choice but to retire the fleet. With the ruler, pilots could literally see the Concorde shrinking and expanding as it flew. By comparison, the Concorde only had 100 seats and a range of just 4,000 miles. This is because when work on the Concorde began in the late 1960s, computers were not really powerful enough for such a complex project. On July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 4590 crashed shortly after takeoff from Paris. The Concorde was heading to New York when it went down, killing 109 passengers and 4 crew members because of the intense friction with the air at Mach 2. The Concorde's fuselage expanded by 6 to 10 inches during flight. Once it landed, it would cool and then shrink. You could even see gaps in the panels, which were designed to allow for this. In fact, The expansion was so intense that engineers had to fit a metal ruler in the cockpit for pilots to measure the stretching in real time. And although the crash wasn't the fault of the Concorde, it certainly didn't help its cause. An investigation revealed that a piece of metal on the runway had punctured a tire, which led to a fuel tank rupturing and then catching fire. The crash prompted calls for the immediate retirement of the Concorde. Despite improvements that could have prevented such a tragedy from happening again, instead, engineers had to do everything manually, which meant that the aircraft was one of the last great engineering projects to be completed without the aid of computers. Even with expensive ticket prices, it never really turned a profit. It had high operating costs, limited seating, and ongoing maintenance needs. In the end, it simply wasn't sustainable to keep the Concorde flying. For example, it was the first commercial aircraft to use fly-by-wire controls and digital engine control. It was also the first commercial jet to be fitted with a droop nose. This is where the front of the aircraft droops downward when on the ground. It allows for better visibility during takeoff and landing. However, it meant that when the plane was in the air, the pilots had to rely on cameras to see where they were pointing. Before, the Concorde aircraft had what was called a fixed landing gear. This meant that the aircraft would literally lift off the ground, but it made takeoffs and landings much more difficult. The plane meant that passengers could travel from New York to London in just under 3.5 hours. But not only did the Concorde cut down travel time, passengers literally gained time. If they crossed a few time zones on the way, they could arrive in London earlier than they left New York. The jet set the record for the fastest commercial plane to cross the Atlantic Ocean, doing so in just 2 hours and 52 minutes, and it could do this because it could cruise at Mach 2.04 or 1,354 miles per hour, or 2,180 kilometers per hour, which is more than twice the speed of sound. In fact, only 20 of these remarkable planes were ever built. So if you were lucky enough to get on board, then you would have been part of an elite club of travelers who had flown in one of the most remarkable airplanes in history. Or for 15 things you didn't know about the Concorde. Number 1, it halved transatlantic travel time, up until Concorde was introduced. A flight from New York to London took somewhere in the region of 7 to 8 hours. No. 2, it reached the edge of space. No. 3, luxury at a price. Flying on the Concorde wasn't cheap. No. 4, it was banned from flying supersonically over land. While the Concorde could reach Mach 2.04 in the air, it wasn't allowed to break the sound barrier while flying over land. This was because of the thunderous sonic booms it produced. If it flew over cities, it would cause serious damage, so it was banned from breaking the sound barrier until it was over oceans or remote areas. This meant that it was restricted to transoceanic routes, mainly between Europe and North America. No. 5, an engineering marvel, ahead of its time. Number 6, it was developed using a slide rule. If you ask any engineer, it will tell you that the best way to build anything is with a computer-aided design. No. 7, burned fuel at an alarming rate. Number 8, the tragic end. Sadly, the Concorde met with a tragic end. No. 9, it was never commercially profitable. There's no doubt that the Concorde was an incredible technological achievement, but it was never commercially profitable. Number 10, it shrunk in flight. Number 11, pilots used a ruler. Speaking of the ruler, this was arguably one of the coolest pieces of kit on board the Concorde. Number 12, it was an international political symbol. No. 13, retired in 2003. In 2003, after 27 years of service, the Concorde was officially retired. Number 14, no true replacement. It's now been 25 years since the Concorde was retired. Number 15, supersonic jet lag reduction. Believe it or not, the Concorde even helped passengers with jet lag. And here's one final fact about the Concorde. It was loud, extremely loud.